What is the danger of ultra-conservative Christian politicians? We're going to find out right now here on the Atheist Forum. You are about to enter the no superstition zone of rational thinking and intellectual curiosity here on the Atheist Forum. Standing by for your questions or comments at 727-441-3000, where you can talk to a real live atheist here on Tan Talk 1340. The voice of atheism in Florida, and boy, I'll tell you what, if there are two politicians on the political arena today that should stand the hair up on the back of any American who appreciates our Constitution, they would be Vice President Mike Pence and Judge Roy Moore. We're going to talk about both of them and the potential dangers they pose to our Constitution and our civil liberties right now on the Atheist Forum. We would be, myself, Ed Golly, our stock standard off-the-shelf co-host Joe Reinhardt, and Tracy Thomas. Mike Pence, we're going to start with him. He claims, I am a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican, in that order. Glad he doesn't include American, because he doesn't seem to know much about what the Constitution represents. He became best known for fiercely opposing abortion. He backed what's called personhood legislation that would ban it under all circumstances, including rape and incest, unless a woman's life was at stake. He sponsored an unsuccessful amendment to the Affordable Care Act that would have made it legal for government-funded hospitals to turn away a dying woman who needed an abortion. Now, he later became the governor of Indiana. We're going to talk about that. He signed a bill barring women from aborting a physically abnormal fetus. The bill also required fetal burial or cremation, including after a miscarriage. A federal judge recently found that law unconstitutional. This guy is straight out of, I'd say, around the mid-19th century, wouldn't you, Joe? And he is now the vice president of this country. And given that tomorrow we're going to maybe see somebody carted off in handcuffs, we just don't really know how close he is to being the top man in the country, the most powerful man in the world, simultaneously perhaps the most medievalist. This is the voice of atheism in Florida. Our website is talk.aof.ngo, and you can insult an atheist for only $2 if you'd like to call in at 441-3000. That's 441-3000 if you're out of the area. Call us toll free at 866-826-1340.
That's half price, by the way, Ed. $2 to insult an atheist, and you can get a 3-for-1 special anytime this evening as well. I want to be candid. We want your money, and there's a reason for that, and that is that we need your money. We're up against a $1 trillion monolith just in the form of organized religion in this country. That doesn't take into account the 6.5 billion people who are sucking on the public trough on a worldwide basis. So it's a very daunting task. There isn't the smallest church in the smallest town in the United States probably has a budget about 10 times the size of ours. So please, dig deep. We want you to pay. You can go to our website, just click on the button. You can donate by PayPal. You can send us a check or a credit card. You can go to Amazon and sign on through Amazon Smile. And when you purchase anything, we get a percentage of that. So it actually costs you nothing to benefit Atheists of Florida. And I know I have said many times, I myself am only in this for the money. So we want yours. Anybody's money will do. It's all fungible, and we don't care who sends it. Now, shall we talk about Mike Pence for another minute or two here? The last time we talked about Mike Pence, I went into some detail about how, after he passed or signed off on the law that women had to have a cremation or a burial even for a miscarriage, that women started sending him their tampons along with letters that said, I've discovered all these lumps in my menstrual flow, and I don't know, should I call the police or just bury this out in the backyard, or what should I do? And so that was just a an indication of the kind of response that Mike Pence got to his legislative efforts, at least on that law, and he did worse on other ones, like the one where, under the guise of religious freedom, you could refuse service to anyone based on your religious beliefs, no matter what they are. I'm all for that. I happen to be a very strong believer. Is it Priapus or Priapus, the god of fertility and erections? And if it's okay with Michael Pence that he tells my wife what she needs to do with her reproductive system based on his belief in a deity, I'm sure he won't object if I tell his wife what to do with her reproductive system and genitalia based on my beliefs and the things that I worship. And I'll be over, one of these days, particularly if he gets himself a better-looking wife. All right, so much for Mike Pence. Let me turn it over here to Tracy Thomas for a second.
Yes.
I know you're a big fan of
Mike
Pence. You can,
is horrifying.
Yeah, you can run down
from
his,
a woman's point of view.
Run down.
I want to roll up in a ball in a fetal position because he's just terrifying.
Careful, they'd have to bury you.
Oh yes, I think sometimes it would be so wonderful to impeach Trump, and I say, no, don't do that. Don't do that. This guy is so far right, even the state of Indiana couldn't stand him. He was pretty much assured that he was not going to win as an incumbent in a gubernatorial race. He's so far right that he's falling off the edge of the earth. It's crazy.
It is, and it was because of his position against not only the abortion issue, but I think more significantly in Indiana was his position against civil liberties for gays, because when he began implementing these laws that clearly were prejudiced against them, then that started to have economic repercussions. And as we all know, the dollar trumps everything, including so-called religious morality in this country. And so when the people in Indiana began to realize that they could take a financial hit for his positions, they decided it's better just not to have him in office. Even now, Donald Trump sort of belittles Pence's determination to overturn Roe versus Wade, and he even says, it really wouldn't help because individual states would still allow abortion, so they're really not going to effectively be able to get rid of it. It's just the poorest people in the states that overturn it or make it illegal are going to be the ones who suffer the most. But
so he tells him he's wasting his time, doesn't he?
Yeah, and when the conversation turns to gay rights, Trump motioned toward Pence and joked, "Don't ask that guy, he wants to hang them all." But how big a joke is that? A really comprehensive article came out in the New Yorker magazine that is what we're really looking at tonight on the forum, that goes into all of Pence's background from, practically from when he was a child, and even at that time wanted to become the president. He set his sights on the presidency, but because of his extremist positions, he just can't even fit in well with the Republican Party. So he did become governor, and then, as you said, Tracy, he really alienated. Oh, yeah.
He won by a whisker.
49% of the vote, and probably, well, at best had a 50-50 chance of getting reelected. The choice for Trump narrowed down to Pence and Chris Christie. The problem there being that Christie was going to need to answer for what they called Bridgegate, and that was going to be ugly. And so, anyway, Trump was ready to select him, and did when the video came out on on Trump's practices
Access Hollywood.
Yes, that's the word I was groping for, which really alienated not only Pence but of course his wife.
We have a caller.
Already. Okay, fine. We'll talk to you. You're on the Atheist Forum.
Yes. Go right ahead. We're glad to stop and answer any questions you might have. Go ahead, caller.
Maybe they just want to
Hey,
insult
this is David Williamson from the Florida Humanist Association in Central Florida Free Thought. I just wanted to.
I remember you.
Familiar
just
voice.
wanted to. Yeah, it was good to see everybody last weekend. I just
Wonderful.
wanted to pass along our most sincere thanks for your attendance at the event and your participation, and of course you guys exhibiting with the Tampa Bay Coalition of Reason. It was fantastic of you to be there and to help us promote it on the air. So thank you so much.
Well, you're welcome. It was a great conference, and we all really enjoyed being there. Hey, you have any comments on either Pence or Roy Moore while you're on the blower?
You know, I got to tell you that I'm not quite talked out on the subject, but I'm sure that our world is never going to be the same after this presidency, and I sure hope this is not the new normal.
And not for the better, that's for sure, too.
Right.
That is a big problem. Really abnormal behavior is
David?
becoming normalized.
Do you have any other events or things of interest coming up in the near future that you'd like to mention briefly while we have you on the line?
You know, I don't have anything in particular in the short term, but we do have the Free Thought Cruise every year that goes out of Florida Port for a weekend. We try to make that reasonable, and we've got Annie Laurie Gaylor and Dan Barker from the Freedom from Religion Foundation coming up in March of 2018, but nothing else big on the radar. I'm looking forward to Phil Zuckerman. It's going to be at the Darwin Day in the Tampa Bay area, so congratulations on scoring that event.
Oh, I wasn't aware of that myself yet.
There's so much going on, you can't keep up.
Yeah, you need David to check in. Thanks, David.
Yeah,
Give our regards to Jocelyn.
Take care, you guys.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Have a great rest of the Sabbath. Okay.
Thank you. And a happy Sunday to you, too. Anybody knows that the Sabbath is on Saturday.
Yes.
Backslider.
Well, anyway, when the Access Hollywood video surfaced, the one most perturbed by it was Pence's wife, who, of course, is absolutely dyed-in-the-wool Christian. She was horrified, and according to a former campaign aide, Pence refused to take Trump's calls and even sent him a letter saying that he and Karen, as Christians, were deeply offended by his actions and needed to make an assessment about whether to remain with the campaign, because by this time Trump had selected Pence to be the VP. So they urged Trump to pray.
Oh, well,
I know what he was praying for, too.
Pence calls Karen, his wife, his prayer warrior. So,
yes.
There you go.
Is that right?
Yes.
You know, I think this Hollywood
Access
Hollywood.
Access Hollywood
Yes.
tape is probably a perfect example of the unlimited scope of Michael Pence's ambitions. Who else would, shall we say,
compromise his integrity?
overlook his most deeply held religious beliefs, which he says his number one, didn't he say something about his number one purpose in life had something to do with his religious beliefs? He's willing to shit-can that completely just for a chance to be vice president on the calculated knowledge that, A, if they do get elected, it's his only chance to be president. B, it's a permanent government largesse for the rest of his life. And C, Trump, because of his age and because of his persona, is not likely to finish one term, let alone two. And so he's the stepping stone to the presidency. And in order to accede to the presidency, even on the slimmest of chances, he is willing to compromise himself to the utmost degree. He is willing to act the sycophant in chief. Okay, he is a lickspittle par excellence. If you want your kids to be popular at school and do well at the office, they need to study Michael Pence, because he is an ass-kisser supreme.
And it doesn't end there. He is also very passionate about teaching, beside evolution, this concept of creation. And he wants this in all the public schools in this country. He revealed that in 2002 when he delivered a speech in the House of Representatives. And, of claims that evolution is just a theory and should be presented as such. Well, that just means he doesn't know what a theory is.
Darwin only considered it to be a theory. That's what he said. Yeah.
Either that or, again, it's just another example of how disingenuous he is willing to be, because he's not so stupid that he doesn't know the difference between a theory about where your wife spent the night last night and a scientific theory, which is judged by peer review and is subject to constant correction.
Based on a body of facts.
And if he doesn't know the difference by now, he is beyond stupid. So I'm sure he knows the difference, which means he's what I like to call just another liar for Jesus.
And, of course, the problem there is if his creation story is taught, then you've got, 200 others that need to be taught beside it, because each of right from the native peoples to the
20,000.
Yeah, exactly. And all of them would have equal weight because all of them have exactly the same amount of evidence for being true,
And
which is
why stop with
zero.
creation? Why not? If you're going to have astronomy, we better teach astrology. If you're going to teach math, certainly numerology is the alternative to
tarot
math.
cards. Exactly.
And if you're going to teach science, then you ought to teach superstition and incantations and other blather to some sort of all-powerful or supernatural being ought to be taught at every level.
And, of course, history gets rewritten as well.
Yeah.
There were some textbooks that included phrases such that our Constitution was based on Moses and the Ten Commandments and so on.
Yeah,
so.
Jesus actually wrote the Bill of Rights himself. I don't know if you're aware of that.
Yes.
No, handed it to the Founding Fathers by way of his dog, I think. You know, the dog chewed up my homework. Well, this was sort of the reverse. It's a miracle.
Why do we need a constitution if everything was based on Christianity? And, of course, that's what these guys are trying to push us back to.
Hello out there in Radioland. Please, someone give us a call right now and give us an example of which biblical family you would like to model your family after. I mean,
Family values.
if our Constitution and our values all come from the Bible, take a quick look at the Bible. You don't even need two or three. Just one example of which family in the Bible you think would be your family. You'd want your family to be just like them. And give us a call and let me know who you think that is. I'd love to hear who it is.
Well, it's fascinating how science is losing credibility among the American public, and this is kind of the movement that's underway to portray it as nothing more than a guesswork by a bunch of people who want to get government grants and enrich themselves. So they just make this stuff up because they don't have every answer exactly right. That means it's all suspect. And we find an alarmingly large percentage of the American public that doesn't accept what science is giving us and is suspicious of it, to the point that now there's talk among this kind of an administration of defunding it significantly, which means that things that could potentially be discovered to advance our life may not be because there's no funding to do that kind of research. That's the potential tragedy of it. We see that in the climate change issue, and we see that in this issue of evolution versus creationism.
And we see it in the rolling back of Clean Air Acts and so on as well that are going to, the thing that worried me the most about this administration is, this is going to set back the progress that we've been making in that area. It could set us back decades. It really could. And we don't have that time. We're not going to get that time back.
No, because even if a subsequent administration comes in and re-implements the protections that these agencies are supposed to provide for us, it takes a very long time to undo the damage that gets done in the interim. And that's what we have to deal with. So that's why these people are so dangerous, because they don't really focus on anything except their particular religious agenda and this unending attempt to impose it on all of us. Then they end up getting backing from people like the Koch brothers, who only think about profits and put profits ahead of everything, including the health and well-being of their customers, their employees, and the environment that we all live in. All that matters is profit. And so these people become their agents so that they can be in power to impose their religious agenda on us. It becomes a very dangerous combination. Let's look also at Roy Moore. And we can get back to Pence.
Anytime.
I know he's one of your favorites. Roy Moore is a twice deposed judge in Alabama, the state of Alabama. We can get into how that happened, but he is now running for the United States Senate in the seat that was vacated by Jeff Sessions when he took over as the United States Attorney General. It's a very high probability, or reasonably high probability, I guess I should say, that he will win that election and ending up taking a seat in the U.S. Senate.
It's pretty close right at the moment.
But it is Alabama, after all, right?
It is
I mean,
Alabama.
look how far he's gotten, right? He was elected to be the Supreme Court judge or the Chief Justice of this Alabama Supreme Court. That's an elected position.
I have a description here, just one sentence by Charles Sykes. I'm not sure. He's a radio talk show host, and he says that Roy Moore is a perfect stew of extremism, ignorance, and intolerance.
A stew.
Yeah, stew, sort of like a perfect wave, in a sense.
Untasty stew.
While I'm hogging the mic, I would like to get today's quote of the week out of the way so we can go on to other business. And I will read that briefly also, which is, "The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity." That's by W.B. Yeats.
Here are some scary thoughts about Roy Moore. He is a judge who recites anti-abortion poetry that he writes himself. He rejects the theory of evolution. Well, we knew that. He doesn't think Muslims should be allowed to serve in Congress. He fought to keep antiquated wording in the Alabama Constitution requiring school segregation. And he suggested that September 11 terrorist attack was God's punishment for America's sins. His first priority in the Senate, he says when he is elected to the Senate, will be to fight to impeach the 5 Supreme Court justices who voted in 2015 to give same-sex couples the right to wed from coast to coast.
So, of course, he wants to turn the clock back on civil liberties.
He spends an awful lot of time worrying about what other people do with their genitalia.
That seems to be the general consensus for the entire right, doesn't it?
Well, that's in itself is suspect. And, again, generally people who worry about other people's sex life do so because they have no time to worry about their own because they don't have one.
Well, but in all fairness, don't you think he's motivated by the Christ insanity that's been shoved down his throat all his life?
Certainly.
And
The first thing they teach you is to be ashamed of your own body and your own natural functions from going to the bathroom to masturbation to nudity to sex.
You definitely drank the Kool-Aid.
And you don't have to do it. You only have to think about it.
Sure. Yeah. And so, of course, I mean, that's all in line with the whole repressive foundation of the major religions that grip the human family in the world today. It's not just Christianity, but the Muslims deal with it even worse than we do, or endure it even.
If you weren't suffering from some sort of malaise, whether a real crime of some sort or an invented crime, which is commonly known as sin, one of the major functions of religion is, of course, to make you feel guilty. All the better to make you cough up a few bucks to ransom yourself or your soul and make yourself feel better about yourself. All the better to get you to join the group so that you can be forgiven. And, of course, you know, if you cut up your little baby with a chainsaw and God forgives you for that, that's wonderful. But I ask you what good that does your baby. So much for the justice of that idea.
Well, you're listening to the Atheist Forum here on Tan Talk 1340. We're going to pause and tell you just a little bit about the Atheists of Florida, which is the organization that puts this program on, and then we'll be back to talk more about Moore and Pence.
All right.
Atheists of Florida is a nonprofit membership organization founded in 1992. For over 25 years, Atheists of Florida has brought atheists together to address state-church separation issues, provide legal assistance in cases of religious discrimination in employment or educational institutions, help atheists meet others who want to live their lives free of religion, and produce the Atheist Forum. For membership information, visit our website at atheistofflorida.com, where you'll find our newsletters, annual reports, statement of purpose, and information about meetings and events. That's atheistofflorida.com. 441-3000 if you'd like to join us by the telephone blower here.
If we can have the monitor in here.
On Tan Talk 1340. Great article about Judge Moore that came out in Time magazine this week. The judge remarked that NFL players who knelt during the national anthem in protest against police brutality or systematic racism were committing a crime. That's how deluded this guy. This guy's a judge and doesn't understand the most fundamental principles of the Constitution. He claims it's against the law. It was an act. He says it was an act of Congress that every man stand and put their hand over their heart. That's the law. Well, of course it isn't. It was simply a section of the U.S. Code that outlined how people should conduct themselves when the anthem is played. But there's other things like it's extremely inappropriate to applaud the national anthem, right? It's not a rock concert for crying out loud, or to wear it as an article of clothing.
He insists that there are cities in Indiana and or Illinois that are governed by Muslims and function under Sharia law. He can't name any cities in either of those states or any other state, but he insists that they're there. And if they aren't, even though it's a major issue with him, but if they aren't, well, so what?
Yeah.
That's what he says. It really matters, but if I'm wrong, so what? I wish I could think of the word for that. Solipsism doesn't seem to fit. It's not self-centered enough.
Well, the thing is, if he does get into the Senate, he's such an extremist that he's only going to fan the flames of they're calling a civil war that's starting to evolve in the Republican Party, because you have the conventional conservatives led by the majority leader, and then you've got the Bannonites who are coming out of the extreme right, who are really not even going to embrace this guy, but it's going to really start to make the government dysfunctional, I think, if he gets in. And of course, if Pence became the president, that would just make things even more dysfunctional, because in the same way that he really couldn't get anything accomplished in Indiana, he would have the same problem trying to get anything accomplished in the United States. So we'd essentially be faced with stagnant government for maybe half a decade.
They'd do more than the Democrats to bring the Senate and the House of Representatives to a standstill. We wouldn't need to
he's a
shut
nightmare
down the government like the Republicans did. They'll shut it down themselves.
He's a nightmare for the Republicans, because if he doesn't win his seat, they're down to 51 seats in the Senate, and it's going to be very difficult for them to pass any legislation. And if he wins, it's just like throwing a bomb into the Senate.
If he loses, it'll be the first time since before Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act that Alabama has sent a Democrat to Congress or the Senate.
Right, yeah.
The first time since like 1980
or something.
Back when they had the Solid South. All of you might not be old enough to remember the Solid South, but at one time the South voted Democratic. It was automatic every year. They were called Yellow Dog Democrats. If the Democrats nominated a yellow dog, that's who was going to be in office come November. So that all changed, of course, with the Nixon strategy and when Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act. In fact, he said when he signed it that you can forget about the South for a generation or more.
Right.
And he was right about it, too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So Moore was twice elected to the Supreme Court in Alabama.
Yes.
Right? And thrown out each time.
Right.
The first time was because he commissioned a granite monument of the Ten Commandments that was erected on the grounds. And I guess in November 2003, finally the Alabama Court of the Judiciary removed Moore from office because he refused to ditch the monument. He just wouldn't do it.
Right.
He originally, when he was first in a judgeship, he hung a plaque that he made up with 10 Commandments in his courtroom. And then
This thing weighed a couple of tons or more.
This one did, yeah.
Yeah, 3 or 4 tons.
The granite monument
They
did.
put it in right out front in the middle of the night. I don't think he paid for it. I think it was donated by the Eagles, I think. Doesn't matter who, but I believe it was donated.
Then in 2012, he ran again and won to become Chief Justice. And just 4 years later, he was removed again from that post by judicial officials, this time for telling Alabama judges not to issue marriage licenses for same-sex marriage after the Supreme Court of the country.
For a judge to ignore the order of a court superior to their own is just like a soldier refusing to take orders in battle. The only difference is if you're a judge, they impeach you. If you're a soldier, they shoot you. But it's the same idea.
Similar to a sheriff in Arizona ignoring the rules of the court, too, right?
One who, by the way, was convicted of a crime, even though he was pardoned for it rather hastily.
Yes.
I want to digress a second while we're on the subject of Roy Moore, because they had a law, and as far as I know, they may still have it. It may still be in court. It was the Alabama dildo law. And it went to the Supreme Court of Alabama twice and was on its way for a third time, where a woman who had a business selling adult toys and items was arrested for selling a vibrating, because it was against the law to sell anything electric or that vibrated that caused sexual gratification in women. And I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of dollars the state of Alabama has spent and is spending to make sure that women don't buy a vibrator in Alabama. And the reason they do that is because the roads and the schools and the housing and the other services in Alabama already have so much more money than they can possibly spend for the benefits of their citizens, which is why they routinely rank around 48th or so in terms of quality of living and education in Alabama, because they spend so much time, as I said earlier, worrying about other people's genitalia.
Well thought effort there.
Yeah. For my part, if I really cared what other people do with their genitalia, I'd be embarrassed to stand out in public and say so.
Well, you know, the thing about the Ten Commandments is it really demonstrates a contempt for the Constitution, because the Constitution doesn't command a citizen to do anything. It really represents the protections that the citizen has against the government being tyrannical toward our civil liberties and our privacy and so on. And so it's a direct contrast of the freedoms that our government gives us. And so when he's trying to impose this on us, what he's essentially saying is he wants to remove those freedoms and use the government to impose his particular personal religious ideologies on all of us. We've heard so often that, we're being invaded from within, right? And
we are,
that means that
by Pence and his ilk.
Yeah, but you know, there was so much fear about same-sex marriage. There was so much fear about legalizing marijuana. There was so much fear about an electric dildo in Alabama. And when these things come to pass, we see no change from the first day to the second. You know, from the day before to the day after.
No domino theory.
Exactly. And so we see that these so-called morals that they want to impose on us are just medievalist ideas that really don't have a substantive foundation at all.
It's even more heinous because as elected officers, they have sworn to uphold and defend the Constitution. And when they start attacking the Bill of Rights and the First Amendment, they're attacking the Constitution, which is the exact reverse of what they swore to do.
Right. Yeah.
That's almost treasonous, if not merely hypocritical.
It's a scary thing because there's 8 Senate seats that are going to be up for grabs in 2018 that they're defending. And, you know, Steve Bannon is swearing to primary most of those senators with this type of candidate.
Right.
So this Senate could essentially be filled with crazies like Moore.
Yeah, and if we get really lucky, thanks to Mr. Bannon and his ilk, it could be filled with Democrats instead. You know, not everybody is a loony.
If only.
If we don't get gerrymandered out of it.
Do we have a call, Pete? Okay, talk to us on the Atheist Forum. Hello.
Ed, this is Jim.
Hey, Jimmy.
Look, I wish you'd make it clear that there are two Bibles. There's the Old Testament and the New Testament. And I have a really hard time understanding why Christians spend so much time trying to protect all the things that are in the Old Testament. That's the Jewish Bible. Mm. And you never hear them talk about anything about protecting anything that's in the New Testament. And I'm kind of against using the term the Bible all the time when we should say the Bibles.
Right.
Because
there are multiple versions within each Bible itself.
But the Christians seem to rely on the Old Testament more than they do the New Testament.
It's even stranger, Jim, because if you actually tried to live by the teachings of the Old Testament, you'd be extremely lucky to avoid the death penalty.
Yes.
By midnight. But, you know, Jim, I think that's part of the real foundation behind the whole voucher movement and the privatization of the school system, because then they can structure the science curriculum any way they want to say that there's no validity to evolution. It's just a guess by a bunch of grant-seeking scientists, and same thing with climate change and so on. What do you
going to pick and choose from the Old Testament? That's where most of the violence is. Mm-hmm. That's where it says you should kill the gays and
endorsement of slavery, right?
Right. That's where all the violence is. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to use the Old Testament as your source, then you got to remember those other sources. It would seem to me. Anyway, I would just hope that we would make it clear that the Christians are using the Jewish Bible to defend the things that they're for.
I'd like to make 2 points very quickly. One is that if you, again, try to interpret or live by the Bible literally, you'd go insane or you'd be put in jails. And if you don't think the Bible is literally true, you have automatically conceded that any deities and stories in it aren't literally true either. So much for the idea of a God, because how else can he be revealed to us? That's the purpose of the Bible. And the second point I want to make quickly is that the New Testament, in its own way, is far worse than the Old Testament, for the reason that in the Old Testament, when you die, you're dead. The earth just swallows you up and you're done for. But in the New Testament, that ain't good enough. They're going to torture you forever. Unspeakable torture, infinite torture for finite crimes. And for what? For a difference of opinion. This is the sort of thing that gives us intolerance, because if you're going to take away my son or my children's eternal life by teaching them about Judaism or Hinduism or atheism, killing you is nothing to protect his immortal soul. Certainly I could kill you if you were about to shoot him or harm him in some way, but that taking away his eternal life, killing you would be a good start. So it gives us all sorts of intolerance, and it gives us inquisitions. The New Testament is more dangerous than the Old Testament, and it hides behind the God is love crap.
I think that's a really good point. And I want to tell you,
thank you.
You're doing a good job in the program tonight.
Thank you, Jim. We appreciate that.
You know, to tie in the Bible to what we were talking about regarding Pence, he holds and hosts a Bible study group for the cabinet.
Yes.
Yes, he does.
Yes.
Yeah, with Ralph Drollinger.
Ralph Drollinger is the evangelical pastor that he brings in. I'm going to give you a quote from Pastor Drollinger. Women with children at home who either serve in public office or are employed on the outside pursue a path that contradicts God's revealed design for them. It is a sin. He also describes Catholicism as a false religion, calls homosexuality a sin, and believes that a wife must submit to her husband. Talk about going back to the 50s or earlier.
Sure. Huh? Well, you know, if these guys had been the founding fathers, clearly the country would be a theocracy. It would never have a constitution. It wouldn't have the democratic process of electing officials. It would be a kingdom. And really, is there any difference that you can delineate for me between a king and a dictator. I can think of none except for the term. Right?
Well, the king makes claim to having a divine right. He's there with the intent and by the grace of God, where a dictator is just there because he's the biggest, meanest guy on the block. So the idea that...
But as far as the civil rights of the population under either
the end
situation,
result is the same.
It's exactly the same,
yeah,
right?
I'm going to punish you for what you think.
And that's exactly what these tenets of the Bible define, right? It's like the Christmas carol, joy to the world, the Lord has come. Let earth receive its democratically elected public representative beholden to a king. It's a king, for Christ's sake. That's what this country would be if the founding fathers had said we're going to base our country on the foundations defined in the Bible.
Even
theocracy.
Even the writers of the Bible are smart enough not to have an electoral college. So I'll give them credit for that.
What else you got, Tracy?
Yes, when before Pence was voted into office in Congress, he hosted a conservative talk radio show for a bit of time, and he called himself Rush Limbaugh on decaf because he could present things in a genial, non-threatening terms, no matter how extreme the positions were. But he pushed, like a lot of right-wing people, he pushed for less government interference in business. However, of course, they pushed for politics that intrude on people's private lives consistently. He supported criminalization of abortion, campaigned against equal rights for homosexuals, and wrote an essay arguing that unmarried women should be denied access to birth control. So they shouldn't get abortions, and they can't get birth control. So you totally take away a woman's right to control her future, essentially.
People forget how recent these rights came into being well-defined and protected. The case of Eisenstadt versus Baird was decided by the Supreme Court in 1979, and that was a case where they decided that it was legal for a member of Planned Parenthood to give a birth control device to an unmarried woman. This was in Massachusetts. 1979. So that's how recent it's been. Up until then, they could put you in jail, not for having an abortion, but just for using some sort of abortion inducing device or pregnancy
abortifacient, they call it.
Or pregnancy preventing device.
And of course, Roe v. Wade was in the 70s as well.
Yeah, I'd like to point out that unlike today's court, which comes down 5-4, 5-4, 5-4, Roe v. Wade came down 8-1.
And so did the Prairie Public School.
That came down 8-1.
Yeah.
Roe v. Wade came down 9-0.
Wow.
And so did Brown versus Board of Education.
So as I read about these people, my perception is that they think the whole world should, and everybody in America should live the way they did in the Beaver Cleaver family, right? Everybody should live a straight life. Everybody should get married in their early 20s, have 2.3 children. But the world just isn't like that, and they can't get their mind around it. So they're trying to force everybody into a situation that just is not natural for every single person.
They, having failed to persuade people to accept or lean towards their views by the power of their argument, are now resorting to money and politics and the police to do it for them.
And what was Pence's position on homosexuals, to be re-educated or
hang them?
No, but he
really,
wanted to.
yeah.
Oh yeah,
wanted them all to go.
Yeah, the
to
gay away.
State funded.
Yeah, of course.
Re-education.
Right.
Yes.
As if anybody makes a conscious decision to become a member of a highly despised minority.
Yeah. Right.
Other than
That was a
atheists.
choice,
Yeah.
right?
No,
But we don't make that choice.
that's a
either.
question, that I've asked any number of gays, of male and female, and that is, well, how old were you? And I always ask this to people who are anti-homosexual, and that is, well, how old were you when you decided to become a heterosexual?
Right.
I've been openly practicing heterosexuality since right before I entered puberty. I'm not ashamed of it.
The scariest thing about Pence is that, while Trump is in office and if you put aside the fear of him pushing the button of getting us into a nuclear war,
Right.
at least, he's a bit of an idiot, a bit of a foil, and is not able to get any legislation through the Congress, right? If he gets impeached or somehow removed from office and Pence ends up becoming president, he might potentially be much more successful in getting various bills through Congress that could really, really change the way we do business.
Yeah, bringing this Congress, their legislative activities to a halt is the next best thing to having them in recess.
It is.
But over the years, Pence has become aligned with the Koch brothers, who now have him basically as their puppet. They're aligned on tax reform. Steve Bannon said the Kochs are 100% with you so long as it means cutting taxes for the Kochs. Anything that will help the middle-class people, forget it. Yeah. And that's where Pence is now getting his funding, is from the Koch brothers.
He's their golden boy.
Exactly, because he will and as you rightly pointed out, right after Trump came in and started making these appointments like Pruitt and DeVos, he said they got the stench of Pence all over him, and as it turns out, he did.
Hey, another caller. Go right ahead, caller.
I just turned on and I don't know what you've been talking about, except you mentioned Pence. Did you talk about him shooting down the Consumer Protection Act and class action by consumers against banks this week?
No, we didn't, as a matter of fact. But didn't he cast the deciding vote on that?
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
The only time he shows up to vote is when it advances the interests of big business. Right?
No, we haven't talked about that. Would you like to make a point or two, please? The mic's all yours.
I'm just disgusted about it, and I'd hate to have him appointing Supreme Court judges just as much as I'd hate having Trump appoint Supreme Court judges. It would be the same, can you prove that you're going to make sure that people described in the Constitution don't have any rights and only corporations have rights, and then you can be a judge?
Yeah, right.
You're right. That's one of the scariest things about this administration. When Trump was first voted in and Pence as his vice president, the two things I was most afraid of was the rolling back of climate change regulations and putting people in the Supreme Court that can affect the way it rules for decades.
Yeah. Reversing the effects of the Trumpistan administration will be difficult, but not impossible, with the exception that the cancer that he will leave in the courts may be untreatable.
And you're right. Trump and Pence would be putting in the same kind of people, there's no doubt about it, as far right as they think they can get away with.
And they talk about family values and Jesus and all that, but Jesus wouldn't be saying stick the poor and make sure people don't have health care and destroy the life on earth and all the things that they stand for. They don't stand for anything that's constructive whatsoever.
You're absolutely right. That's one of the amazing things to me about people that are in the religious right. They seem to be the least willing to help people in this country. They're so against any kind of legislation that would actually help people with health care or food or shelter. And it's the liberals that are the least God-fearing that do tend to want to do that for people.
I haven't seen Mike Pence or any of his good friends trying to sell everything that they hast and give it to the poor. So if they have tried to do that, they're not having much luck, and they're certainly keeping it pretty quiet.
But there's always a dichotomy between giving to people who don't contribute to society and demand that they be paid to be alive, and then making sure that those who already have too much get more, and nothing is taken from them in the way of taxes.
Yeah,
I guess after this World War II, the tax rate was 90%.
Right.
On the highest tax brackets, and they're getting it farther and farther down until. It's just a balancing act between like I don't want to work, and you guys should pay me to be alive, and I've got way too much money, and I intend to keep it, and I will purchase government to make sure it stays that way.
People don't understand that. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No,
people don't understand that when the tax rate is 90%, rather than pay those kind of taxes, businesses will take that money and reinvest it in their business, because then it's a write-off. And so if you want to create more business, you don't give all the money to the rich people and wait for the scraps to fall on the floor. What you do is you tax the hell out of them, which forces them to reinvest in their business, which creates more jobs, which creates more money, which creates more taxes and more revenue. And
there you go.
So
They've already
on and
got
so
all the
forth.
money already.
I know.
And if the proposed elimination of the estate tax is affected through this
Yeah, the Paris
legislation,
Hilton law.
I mean, the Koch brothers' heirs will have a windfall of billions of dollars, right?
Tens of billions.
Yeah. It's just incredible.
The
And the
disparity.
damnedest thing is, tax dollars, what happens to them? They get spent immediately, right? So when a wealthy person pays taxes, the money is spent immediately, whether it's on a teacher's salary or a road improvement or whatever. But if it's kept in the pocket of the rich guy, he's not obligated to spend it. He's got more money, knows what to do with anyway. We saw that from Mitt Romney, right? He
not
sticks it
gonna
over in the
raise
Cayman
salaries.
Islands. So the best thing you can do to improve the economy is tax people so that the money circulates and does something constructive. Anyway, we didn't get into the tax issue, but given that the Koch brothers are the financial backers now of Pence, then he's there to serve their interests.
That's why Trump likes having him around as well, because that's his conduit to
Yes.
the Koch brothers' money, because they were not supporting Trump
Right.
prior to
Exactly.
him bringing Pence on board.
You're right. So, okay, any final words, or you care to insult anybody, caller?
Don from Largo.com, just a crass.
It's your own show, Don. I mean, thanks for calling and all, but Jesus,
right,
all right.
great.
Good night.
Catch you later. Adios.
Thanks for
Seriously,
calling.
come down and join us on the show, Don. We'd be glad to have you sit in with us anytime.
Okay. All right, we got about a minute left. At the risk of being laughed out of the studio, I still think there is a possibility that Roy Moore could become a nominee for the Supreme Court, whether he becomes a senator or not. Everybody thinks I'm crazy for thinking that. But I'm going to be the first one to say I told you so if it happens. So,
I
I'm
think-
writing it down. I'm
No,
writing it down.
I can see the possibility of him getting nominated as a stalking horse. With Roy Moore out there, almost Mike Pence starts to look heaven sent.
Sure, but between him and Thomas and the guy Trump put on,
Gorsuch.
Gorsuch,
Oh,
a third of the court
Oh,
would be a medievalist court, right?
I know, but as I said, I don't see Moore actually getting nominated or confirmed, but I do see him, or getting confirmed rather, but I do see him getting nominated again for the simple reason that any drag that they might pony up after that has got to look pretty good compared to him.
Yes. So things could be very challenging for those of us in the community of reason and those of us who appreciate the civil liberties that our Constitution has, as these people seek to do nothing more or less than take them away from us as fast as they can. You've been listening to the Atheist Forum here on Tan Talk 1340. Tell your worst enemies about our program. I'm sure they'll like it. Thanks for being with us. Hope you'll join us again next week on the forum. Now, along with Tracy Thomas and Joe Reinhardt, I'm Ed Golly, reminding you, if the story seems a little too implausible to be true, don't believe it just because somebody wrote it down.
Make them prove it.
You have been listening to the Atheist Forum. To learn more about Atheists of Florida, visit our website at atheistofflorida.com. Continue the discussion on our website, talk.aof.ngo. Join us again next Sunday for another edition of the Atheist Forum here on Tan Talk 1340.